Ethan Carter has always prided himself on living life on his own terms. A decorated military veteran turned local city official, and above all, a dedicated farmer, Ethan's sprawling property, Carter Acres, is his sanctuary. Nestled on the edge of a suburban community that values uniformity over individuality, his farm has been in his family for generations. Here, golden fields, a time-worn barn, and a state-of-the-art irrigation system converge to create a haven of natural beauty and hard-won independence. For Ethan, every aspect of his farm tells a story. The irrigation system, a modern marvel that channels water to every crop and pasture, is more than just a tool. It's the lifeblood of his operation. It has allowed him to adopt innovative, sustainable farming practices while preserving the traditions of his forefathers. This system not only nourishes his crops, but also symbolizes his commitment to self-reliance and the free, independent spirit that defines Carter Acres. However, not everyone in the neighborhood shares Ethan's vision. Overseeing the community with an iron fist is Kerren, the self-appointed president of the local homeowners association, HOA. With her impeccably tailored suits, perfectly coiffed hair, and a clipboard that seems inseparable from her hand, Kerren is determined to impose her vision of suburban perfection on everyone, even if it means disregarding long-held traditions and property rights. The conflict began on a seemingly ordinary morning when Ethan stepped outside to check on his irrigation system. To his shock, he discovered that the water running through his meticulously maintained canals had been mysteriously diverted. Later, after following the trail, he found that water was being siphoned off from his system, a theft that left his fields dangerously parched. Rumors quickly spread that Kerren herself had orchestrated the diversion, arguing that the water was wasteful and that excess moisture ruined the neighborhood's pristine image. Furious and feeling utterly betrayed, Ethan confronted Kerren at a community meeting that very day. "Kerren, how dare you steal water from my irrigation system?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "That water is the lifeblood of my farm, my crops, my animals, my very livelihood. I never authorized you to tamper with my property." Kerren's reply was icy and condescending. "Ethan, the rules apply to everyone," she snapped. "If your property does not conform to our community standards, corrective measures must be taken. I'm merely ensuring that excess water isn't wasting away on your land when it could be used to maintain order in the neighborhood." Her words cut deep. For Ethan, this was not a minor misunderstanding. It was an overt assault on his rights and the legacy of Carter Acres. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, Ethan stood at the edge of his parched field, a burning resolve taking root. He vowed that if Kerren and her cronies continued to infringe on his property and livelihood, he would fight back with every tool at his disposal. And as the night fell, the spark of rebellion was lit. A battle for independence had begun. The very next morning, Ethan found an official notice taped to his farmhouse door. The document, embossed with the HOA's crest and signed by Kerren herself, accused him of violating community water conservation standards due to the missing water in his irrigation system. It demanded that he restore his water supply immediately or face a fine of $750. The notice was dripping with legalese and authoritarian language, leaving no doubt that Kerren intended to enforce her narrow vision at any cost. Ethan's heart raced as he read the notice. He knew his irrigation system had always operated within local laws, and that his water rights were well documented. Determined to defend his property, he gathered copies of county regulations, zoning laws, and water rights documents that clearly affirmed his right to manage his own resources. With this evidence in hand, Ethan drafted a formal complaint disputing the fine and challenging the HOA's overreach. That morning, as a light drizzle began to fall, a sleek sedan pulled up to his property. Two uniformed inspectors emerged, clipboards in hand, and marched purposefully toward his fields. "Mr. Carter," one said in a monotone voice, "we're here on behalf of the HOA to verify that your irrigation system complies with community standards." Ethan met them at the door, his tone calm but resolute. "My system has always been maintained according to local regulations. I have every legal right to distribute water to my crops as I see fit," he explained, handing them the copies of the relevant documents. Despite his detailed explanation, the inspectors took careful notes and measurements, following Kerren's strict orders. Soon after, Kerren herself arrived on the scene. Dressed in a crisp suit and exuding authority, she looked over the system with a disdainful air. "Ethan, if you do not restore your water supply to acceptable levels immediately, you will face further penalties," she stated imperiously. "The rules apply to everyone, regardless of personal sentiment." Her words stung deeply. That evening, as Ethan sat in his study poring over legal texts and zoning ordinances, he realized that Kerren's actions were less about conserving water and more about asserting control. The fine was not just a monetary threat. It was a declaration that his property and independence were subject to her arbitrary standards. Determined to fight back, Ethan prepared for the escalating battle, resolved to protect his legacy at all costs. In the days that followed, Kerren's tactics escalated dramatically. What began as a single notice soon evolved into a relentless campaign of intimidation. Ethan found multiple violation notices affixed to various parts of his property, each accusing him of different infractions such as improper water usage, unsanitary irrigation practices, and failure to maintain community aesthetics. The language was harsh and unforgiving, designed solely to pressure him into compliance. Rumors began to circulate among the neighbors. Several residents, who admired Ethan's commitment to sustainable farming, shared that they too had received similar notices for relatively minor issues. One concerned board member discreetly revealed to Ethan that funds were being diverted for Kerren's personal use, and that fines were sometimes imposed arbitrarily to serve a vendetta against nonconformity. Determined to expose the truth, Ethan set up discreet cameras around his irrigation channels and near his water storage facilities. Over the next few days, he captured footage of inspectors arriving unannounced, measuring water flow, and attaching yet another violation notice to a pump housing. One particularly damning clip showed an inspector meticulously checking the water pressure and scribbling notes as if evaluating a public monument, not a private, family-run system. Ethan compiled all of this evidence into a comprehensive dossier. Photographs of the notices, video recordings of intrusive inspections, and even anonymous testimonies from sympathetic neighbors painted a damning picture of Kerren's campaign. It was clear that this was not about water conservation or community standards. It was about control and intimidation. When the next HOA board meeting was announced, the atmosphere in the neighborhood was electric. Frustrated homeowners gathered in the community center, many clutching copies of Ethan's dossier. As Ethan took the stage, he calmly recounted the timeline of events, from the initial fine to the avalanche of subsequent notices, and presented his evidence in a clear, methodical manner. The room fell silent as every piece of evidence undermined Kerren's claims, and even some board members began to exchange uneasy glances. By the end of the meeting, the collective anger was palpable. What had started as a dispute over water was now a fight for the fundamental right to manage one's property without arbitrary interference. The seeds of rebellion were sown, and the community's determination to stand up against Kerren's tyranny had grown stronger than ever. One brisk morning, as Ethan was checking his irrigation system, he discovered that Kerren had escalated her tactics to a new level. In a shocking turn of events, Kerren had commandeered a section of his farm's water supply, redirecting water from his main irrigation channels to a makeshift installation on his dock. There, she had installed a luxurious hot tub, claiming that it would enhance community engagement by providing a public amenity. To Ethan, this was an outrageous act of property theft and a blatant display of disregard for his rights. Furious, Ethan inspected the damage. His carefully balanced irrigation system had been disrupted, leaving parts of his fields parched and his crops in jeopardy. The hot tub, gleaming under the morning sun, was an affront to everything his farm stood for, a symbol of Kerren's misplaced priorities. Determined to strike back, Ethan devised an ingenious plan. He decided that if Kerren was so intent on misusing his water, he would replace it with something that would force her to face the consequences of her actions. After careful consideration, he opted for liquid fertilizer, a substance that, while beneficial for his crops, would wreak havoc on any structure not designed to handle it. Ethan reprogrammed his irrigation system, diverting the water that Kerren had stolen and mixing it with a potent, environmentally safe fertilizer. At precisely the right moment, he activated his modified system. Instead of clear water, the hot tub on his dock filled with a thick, nutrient-rich liquid fertilizer. The unexpected transformation was both hilarious and infuriating for Kerren. Instead of enjoying a relaxing soak, she was forced to confront a tub filled with a substance that was as unappealing as it was uncontrollable. Neighbors who witnessed the spectacle couldn't help but laugh, and soon, photos and videos of the fertilizer-filled hot tub spread quickly through social media, turning Kerren's misguided stunt into a viral moment of poetic justice. For Ethan, the act was more than just payback. It was a powerful statement that his property and his water rights were not for the taking. His resourcefulness in transforming a misappropriated resource into a weapon of defiance resonated with the community, and even those who had previously been wary of confrontation now rallied behind him. Kerren, however, was not prepared for the backlash. Despite her best efforts to control the narrative, the image of her attempting to salvage the hot tub now filled with liquid fertilizer had become a symbol of her overreach and incompetence. It was clear to everyone that her attempts to impose her will on Ethan's property had gone too far. Desperate to reclaim control and silence Ethan's growing defiance, Kerren escalated her tactics one final time. That evening, still seething from the humiliation of the fertilizer stunt, she picked up the phone and called the local police, claiming that Ethan's altered irrigation system constituted a public safety hazard and that his property management was endangering the community. It was a last-ditch effort to leverage law enforcement as a weapon against Ethan's independent spirit. Within minutes, a police patrol arrived at Carter Acres. The officers, maintaining their professional detachment, met Ethan at his farmhouse. Calm and composed, Ethan presented copies of permits, zoning documents, and records proving that his irrigation modifications were legal and environmentally sound. The officers carefully reviewed the evidence and commended the efficiency of his system, dismissing Kerren's baseless complaint as frivolous. Undeterred, Kerren wasn't finished. In a final attempt to undermine Ethan, she secretly hired a private investigator to dig up evidence of supposed mismanagement on his part. Late that night, while the community slept, the PI attempted to sneak onto Ethan's property. However, Ethan's pre-installed security cameras captured every moment. The footage clearly showed the investigator trespassing and triggering alarms, further cementing the fact that Kerren was willing to break the law to maintain her power. At the next HOA meeting, with the entire neighborhood in attendance, Ethan took to the podium once again. With quiet resolve, he played the incriminating footage for everyone to see. "This evidence," he declared, "proves that Kerren's desperate measures have crossed the line into criminal behavior. Instead of protecting our community, she has been abusing her power for personal vendettas." The room fell into shocked silence, punctuated by murmurs of approval and outrage. Kerren attempted to interject with weak excuses, but the evidence was undeniable. By the close of the meeting, it was clear that Kerren's final, desperate move had backfired spectacularly. The police had dismissed her complaint, and the incriminating footage left no doubt about her trespassing. Under mounting pressure from both the community and local authorities, Kerren was issued a trespassing citation, a symbolic blow that further eroded her credibility. In the wake of Kerren's arrest and the overwhelming evidence against her, the community's long-held frustration erupted into organized rebellion. An emergency town hall meeting was convened in the local community center, a stark, fluorescent-lit space that, on that day, became the battleground for the residents' revolt against arbitrary authority. Homeowners, tired of being bullied by Kerren's relentless fines and invasive inspections, gathered in large numbers, armed with copies of Ethan's comprehensive dossier, photographs, video recordings, and personal testimonies detailing every instance of her abusive tactics. One by one, residents recounted their experiences of being harassed and fined for trivial deviations, and the collective anger in the room was palpable, a resounding chorus declaring enough is enough. After hours of impassioned debate, the community voted unanimously to dissolve the current HOA board and remove Kerren from her position as president. The decision was swift and decisive, a clear rejection of the oppressive regime that had long stifled their freedoms. Local media quickly picked up the story, heralding it as the fall of the HOA tyrant, while city officials launched an independent investigation into the board's financial practices. It soon emerged that funds had been misappropriated to support Kerren's personal vendettas, and countless fines had been imposed solely to intimidate those who dared to live differently. For Ethan, the collapse of the HOA was a moment of quiet vindication. Sitting on his porch one crisp morning, he sipped his coffee as the sun rose over his reclaimed property, a property now free from the oppressive dictates of Kerren's regime. Across the neighborhood, the dark shadow of bureaucratic tyranny had lifted, replaced by a vibrant spirit of unity and self-determination. Following the community's decisive vote and the dramatic dissolution of the corrupt HOA board, the full force of the law was unleashed. City inspectors and independent auditors conducted a thorough review of the board's financial records and enforcement practices, uncovering a tangled web of misappropriated funds and baseless fines that had been imposed solely to serve Kerren's personal agenda. Money earmarked for community improvements had been diverted, and fines were levied with no factual basis. Armed with this overwhelming evidence, a coalition of affected homeowners, led by Ethan, filed a class action lawsuit against the former board. In a series of public hearings, Ethan presented his meticulously compiled dossier, video footage of intrusive inspections, photographs of absurd violation notices, and internal communications exposing systematic abuse of power. The courtroom became a stage for the community's collective voice. The judge's verdict was swift and unequivocal. Heavy fines were imposed on board members. Several individuals faced criminal charges for fraud and mismanagement, and all misappropriated funds were ordered to be redirected toward community development projects. Furthermore, the settlement mandated that a new, democratically elected board be established to govern transparently in the future. Local headlines soon blared "Fall of the HOA Tyrants," and the case became a beacon of hope for communities standing up against arbitrary authority. For Ethan and his neighbors, the legal victory was not just about financial restitution. It was a powerful reclamation of their autonomy and a clear message that no one is above the law. With the legal verdict and public humiliation now firmly in place, Kerren's personal world began to crumble rapidly. Once the iron-fisted enforcer of the HOA's draconian rules, she was now exposed as a petty, overreaching bully whose actions had brought disgrace upon herself. Forced to resign from her position as president, Kerren found herself isolated. Former allies and board members distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with her tarnished legacy. Her stately home, once a proud symbol of suburban status, was soon put on the market amid swirling rumors of financial ruin, and whispers spread that her longtime partner had finally abandoned her, unable to bear the relentless pressure and public disgrace. Her attempts to secure even a modest role in property management were met with derision. At local job fairs, potential employers exchanged skeptical glances whenever her name was mentioned, and the community's scorn was palpable. In one particularly humiliating moment at a city hall meeting, Kerren desperately tried to justify her actions as necessary for maintaining community order, only to be met with laughter and pointed remarks from residents. Kerren's personal downfall became a living cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is immune from accountability when power is abused. For Ethan, witnessing Kerren's collapse was a quiet moment of poetic justice. There was no overt celebration, only a deep, measured satisfaction in knowing that tyranny, no matter how entrenched, eventually crumbles when faced with the united spirit of a community determined to live free. Kerren's personal ruin became a symbol of how accountability triumphs over arbitrary authority. As autumn deepened into a crisp, clear evening, the community of Carter Acres embraced a new era of freedom and unity. The dark days of arbitrary fines, invasive inspections, and oppressive HOA mandates were now relegated to cautionary tales, an ugly chapter that had finally been closed. Ethan sat on his porch, the warm glow of the setting sun reflecting off his reclaimed property, a quiet smile on his face as he recalled the long battle. At a celebratory block party in the community park, neighbors gathered to toast their hard-won victory over bureaucratic tyranny. Laughter filled the air as residents shared humorous anecdotes about past misdeeds, especially the day when Kerren, attempting to inspect his mailbox yet again, was caught red-handed on his surveillance cameras, leading to her arrest for federal theft. In one particularly playful moment, a longtime friend produced a comically oversized HOA violation notice, accusing Ethan of excessive mailbox vigilance and unauthorized federal theft. With a wry grin, Ethan accepted the faux citation and quipped, "I guess they really did try." The crowd erupted in laughter and applause, a final, resounding mic drop on the era of oppression. As twilight deepened and the party wound down, families and friends lingered together, discussing plans for a future built on transparency, innovation, and mutual respect. The oppressive rules that once loomed over Carter Acres were replaced by a community-led governance system that celebrated individuality and safeguarded personal rights. Sitting quietly on his porch as the last light faded, Ethan reflected on the journey. His mailbox, stolen time and again by an overzealous, tyrannical Kerren, had finally been restored thanks to his vigilant security system and subsequent legal action. The legacy of HOA Kerren's petty reign had been consigned to a cautionary tale, and the united spirit of the community shone brighter than ever. Fade to black.